So my story is a little bit of background. Goes back to when I was 10 years old. I told my mom at a certain point that I wanted to own my own restaurant. Now, I also told her that I wanted to be center fielder for the Chicago Cubs, and I think I told her I wanted to take Olivia Newton-John to the Grammys. So so who knows how much basis that had behind it, and I really didn't know what a restaurateur did. My idea was that we probably threw a party every night. A bunch of people came, they'd mess it all up, we'd clean it up, and then we'd do it again, which really isn't that far from the truth. Um, but I didn't take it really seriously until I went to the University of Illinois. Now, one of my fraternity brothers from the University of Illinois, Jason Hefner, is here today. Where are you at, Jason? Right there. So I lived in a house with Jason, and two of my roommates were budding legends. One, Mike Hopkins, was the last American astronaut in space. He's the commander of the SpaceX mission. He's been on 3 space missions. And then another who I was very close with was Dave Eggers. Now, Dave has written 40 books. He's a finalist for the Pulitzer. He wrote 2 Tom Hanks movies, The Circle and Hologram for the King. And he wrote the screenplay to Where the Wild Things Are. So I was a moron from Springfield, Illinois. So compared to them, I felt very lonely standing in the shadow of those 2 smart guys who knew exactly what they wanted to be. So one night, Dave is talking to me and he says, Kevin, you don't want to be a lawyer. Because I was pre-law. And I was like, you're right, I don't. And he goes, well, what do you really want to do? Now, mind you, this is 1989, and being in restaurants is not as cool as it is now. And so I said, I go, well, it's kind of cheesy, but I want to own my own restaurant. And he said, well, why aren't you doing that? And I was like, well, I don't know anybody who does it. I don't have any mentors. I'm a poor kid. I'm putting myself through school. I just don't know if it's realistic. And he goes, Kevin, Mike thinks he's going to be an astronaut. So I said, touche. So the next semester, in what seems to be now maybe a very dumb plan, I said, you know what? What if I pack my Jeep up and I drive to Florida? I thought legitimate restaurants were in Florida. I didn't know where to go. I was like, warm weather, there's fresh fish, there's a bunch of tourists. That must be the perfect place. Go down to Florida. If I take a job in the afternoon, I live off that job, and I take a job at night, and I save all that money, eventually I'll have enough money to own a restaurant. So, pack my Jeep up, I drive south. I get down there, and no one will hire me in a restaurant. Those jobs are very sought after. The only job I get is working at an amusement park. So I'm working at an amusement park. I move in with a guy who I catch stealing from me. His name was on the lease, so I get kicked out. And I've been in Florida about 6 weeks, and I have no money left, and I'm homeless. So the first time that you live in your car, you think to yourself, this is probably going to make a really good book someday. The second time you live in your car, you think, there's probably not going to be a book. Fortunately, I only lived in my car once. So, and then I had this great idea, and I wrote my first amazing piece of fiction. I wrote this incredible resume that was filled with that was filled with restaurants that had all gone out of business, so you couldn't call anybody for a reference check. And I went in, and I got a captain's job at a restaurant, and it took me like 3 days, and I was like, I'm hooked. And even though I was still learning how to do everything in there on the fly, um, I knew instantly that there was one thing that I was good at. I was good at being nice to people, and I had a real, true, sincere sense of wanting to take care of people. And for the last 30 years, the one question I've asked in every interview that I've ever had of anybody is, do you like taking care of people? And almost everybody says yes, but I can tell if it's the truth or not. Chicagoans have a really good bullshit detector. I don't know if you know that or not, but mine's pretty good. But my time down there in Florida, it seemed to be filled with things that were telling me that maybe I was on the wrong track. Even after I got that job, I moved into a little tiny apartment, and someone who was illegally keeping a bobcat as a pet, it escaped their house, it ran into mine and attacked me. And so it was at this point that I was like, I was asking the universe if I could open up my own restaurant. I was pretty sure the universe was telling me no. But I kept my head buried and I ended up doing that. I worked a job in the afternoon. I lived off of it. I saved everything I made off of the second job. And 31 years ago, I opened up a little tiny 6-table restaurant called the Lazy Days Cafe with my girlfriend at the time, Teresa. And our very first service, I reached down to put a piece of bread in the oven. The pilot light went out. The oven blew up my face and caught my hair on fire. So my mom had always told me, my mom was a woman of few words, but one of the things she said, if anything in life ever comes too easy, be skeptical of it. Anything that's worth having in life will test you at some point. And so homelessness, bobcats, oven blowing up in my face. I was like, okay, mom, maybe this is worth it. So I opened up the 6-table restaurant, and that restaurant was basically my associates and my bachelor's degree in opening up restaurants. That's where I learned everything. But my second restaurant, we sold that restaurant, opened up a second one, and that's when the light went off for me. I went to a restaurant one night and I was trying to impress my girlfriend by taking her to the most fine dining restaurant I'd ever been to before. First time I'd been to a restaurant where the maitre d' wore a tuxedo. Servers came by with gyrodons tableside, and I walk into the restaurant and I'm kind of sweating because I'm sure he's going to say something that I've never heard before or didn't know how to pronounce. And I'd already pre-rehearsed that whatever he asked me, I would just say, whatever the chef recommends. And so we get in the restaurant and my table, there's only 6 tables in the restaurant. My table specifically, the guy at that table is super drunk, super loud, way too a fan of his big jokes. And it looks like my romantic date is going to be ruined. I sit down at the table. The maitre d' winks at me as he hands me a menu. And when I open it up, there's a Post-it note inside of the menu. And it says, Dear Mr. Boehm, the guy on your left is an asshole. He will be gone soon. Until then, bear with us. Love, Bruce. And that's when my brain exploded. So service is black and white. Hospitality is color. And that was the first time I saw the color. I was like, so wait a second. What you're telling me is I have a blank canvas inside my restaurants. I can do anything. And at that point, I was just learning what service was. Service was I serve somebody from the left side with my left hand to keep my body open to them. This is how I hold a plate. Don't keep my thumb on it. That's all the stuff I was learning. Hospitality is what excited me and kept me going in this business. And I started to go out and take some chances. And so my big moment, and what I call this is being a cameo performer in the biggest moments of people's lives. That's what we really get every single day. So a guy walks into my second restaurant and he had bought it out for the night, and it was his 25th wedding anniversary. And he brought with him a bottle of 1961 Chateau Lafite. So Chateau Lafite, one of the 5 first gross, 1961, perhaps the best year in the history of Bordeaux. That bottle back then was probably worth $5,000. His father had given it to him on their wedding night. Here it was all these years later, 25 years later, and they were going to open it up. And the father had passed away. So the bottle represented the dad being at that event. And even the invitation had a picture of the bottle on it. Brought it an hour beforehand and asked me to decant it. Put my wine knife in, and as soon as I put it in, I knew we were in big trouble. Cork crumbled, wine was corked, man started to cry hysterically in front of me. I said, wait a second. You and I are the only 2 people that know that this bottle is corked. I was like, what if we replace it with something? He goes, Kevin, these people are very wine savvy. They're going to know that that bottle of 97 Silver Oak you have up there is not this bottle of 61 Lafite. I was like, I got you. I was like, Seaside, Florida back then where I was had been very quiet back in the day. And the CIA actually had a safe house down there. When somebody from the CIA retired, they gave that guy that safe house. And I had been to that house once because he wanted me to see his wine cellar. And he had a crazy wine cellar. And he was this old guy, a super romantic. And I go, hold on one second. I call Bob. I go, Bob, here's the situation. He goes, I'll be right back. Gets on the phone. And the guy's saying to me, he goes, I can't afford to buy it. Just wait. Guy goes, I don't have a 61, but I have a 66. Second best year in the 60s. Tell you what, bring me $100 cash money this year. I don't even say anything to the guy. I just say, I'll be right back. Took $100, grabbed the bottle, canned it. It's perfect. Rinsed out the bottle of 61, threw out the bottle of 66, put that next to the decanter. Crowd comes in. They pour wine for everybody. They all drink it. And they're all talking about the greatest wine they've ever had in their entire life. He tells a story about his father. There's not a dry eye in the house. And then the guy looks at me, comes over. There's a little bit left in the decanter. He pours a glass for me. He brings me over a glass. Italian guy grabs my face. He kisses me on both sides of my cheeks and he whispers in my ear and he goes, "You are a beautiful liar, young man." And I was like, yes. And so I was like, wow. So maybe the most important part of what I do is paying attention. The power of eavesdropping and paying attention to details in this business, I think, has never been more important than it is right now. And so we live in a pretty crazy world right now. And everywhere you go, especially probably social media, there's a lot of hate a lot of times and a lot of bad feelings. I know that my job is secure for the future because I can offer people a safe resting place from all of those things. And when these moments come up, we can do what my best friend calls unreasonable hospitality. So I don't know if you've read this book yet or not, but there's a book out called Unreasonable Hospitality written by Will Guidara, who is my best friend. And he was the king of things like that beautiful liar story I just told you. He wrote a whole book about it. Will owns the #1 restaurant in the world, 11 Madison Park. And the great thing about World's Best 50 is if you get invited, you know you're part of the 50. And the first time that he ever went, um, they knew they were in the 50. It's the only award ceremony you don't want to hear your name because they go in descending order. So him and his partner Daniel are sitting in the crowd and they're trying to guess what number they are, but where they're sitting in the crowd. And Will's like, I think we're number 35. And Daniel's like, nah, we're positioned up here, closer to the stage. I think we're number 29. So they start it and they go, coming in at number 50, a new entry, 11 Madison Park. And it was on TV in London, and Will was caught on camera saying, yeah. So instead of going to that party that night, Will sat with Daniel and said, how can we go from 50 to 1? And he wrote on a cocktail napkin, unreasonable hospitality. And they went back. He grabbed every piece of his restaurant. He had the baristas over here. He had the bar team over here. He had the polishers over here. And he said, let's segment this. And how do we make every single piece of what we do the best? So he went to his coffee team and he said, what's the best coffee shop in America? They're like, Sunshine Coffee. He's like, okay, what do they do that we don't do? When he got to the bar, he said, what's the best bar in America? I don't know what they said. They might have said Dead Rabbit. And the mixologist goes, yeah, but we can't be them because, they get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and they're making all these guest streaks. So they do this and do that. And Will goes, there's the door. And that's what they did. They tried to make every segment of what they did the best. But what really made him special, and I think for the future of restaurants, this is how we have to compete. Because I think what's going to happen is between AI and all this sort of stuff, you're going to have meals that are utility, and that's quick service restaurants. And then you're going to go for an experience. And whoever can make the experience the best is who's going to win. Will's at a table one night and he overhears a table in 11 Madison Park saying, well, we did it all. We went to Boulay, we went to Brooklyn Fair, we went to Per Se, we've now been here, we did every Michelin 3-star restaurant, we did every 4-star restaurant. The only experience we didn't have culinarily was a dirty water hot dog. And so Will heard that, he ran out, he grabbed a guy at a hot dog cart, they rolled the hot dog cart up to the table, Daniel came out with a gyrodon next to it, the guy would hand him a hot dog, he's cut it like this, Will did a little smear of ketchup on all the plates and they served them all hot dogs. And that, they said, was the best dining experience they had in New York. Just from listening. One night, 2 kids from Australia saw that it was snowing outside. They'd never seen snow before. They ran to the door to watch it, coming down like crazy. By the end of their meal, they had packed up a car for them, bought sleds, had sleds in the back, and had a car take them to go sledding. You can't do this with everybody. But There are so many small versions of this that we can do. Um, People always like to ask people the best. We live in a culture of what's the best this you ever saw? What's the worst? People always ask me, what's the best dining experience you've ever had in your entire life? And this story specifically is a story I've told more than any other story. I tell it before every opening that we ever have. In 1997, I was driving from my restaurant in Springfield, Illinois at the time to a restaurant in St. Louis that we were looking at maybe buying. We pulled off at an exit in Carlinville, Illinois, and just to have a hamburger at Wendy's. And when I walked in the door, there was a woman stationed at the front of the Wendy's, almost like she was a maitre d'. She just said, "Gentlemen, welcome to Wendy's Hamburgers." I was like, "Thank you, Jane." I'd never seen a maitre d' at a fast food restaurant before, so I walk up to the front, and the guy told us about Dave's new spicy chicken sandwich like he was a captain at Alinea, going through ingredients, and I was like, "Well, that sounds great. I'll have the spicy chicken sandwich." I ordered a water. Wendy's used to have a super bar. I ordered that too. You guys might not remember, but they used to have a bar with like penne pasta on it and stuff like that, and salad. And as I got my penne pasta, the woman who was the greeter was coming by and hitting the errant penne pasta into a napkin. And then at one point, the woman came by and she refilled my water with a pitcher. And I looked across the way to my friend Scott, who I was with, who's a chef, and I just said, "The hell is going on?" He said, I think we're dining at the greatest fast food restaurant ever." And I was like, "Well, who is this manager inside this restaurant that got everybody to do this?" And he goes, "Well, he must be someone special." And so I was like, "We're gonna go talk to him." So I go up and I was like, "Can I see the manager?" And the guy that was up front was like, "Sir, is there some sort of a problem?" I'm like, "No, no, there's no problem." He comes out in a perfect Windsor knot and his Wendy's tie, and he's like, "Gentlemen, can I help you?" And I was like, "Well, listen, I just have to tell you." I go, "This is the best fast food restaurant I've ever dined in my entire life. It's a really well run place. I see all the things that you do." And he goes, "Well, as you can see, we're very proud of it." And on the wall, they were the number one Wendy's in the US. They had won the Golden Wendy's Award. So I didn't even want to go to St. Louis because I wanted to drive back and get pre-shift so bad and talk about this Wendy's store we were at. But what made me think of was cover versions. Everybody that's in this crowd today, I doubt you have a job that is truly, truly unique. Almost everybody's doing a job that someone has done before. Manager of a hotel, a writer, a cook, a restaurateur. We're all doing cover versions. The Beatles were the standard bearer for everything that they ever did in music until they did With a Little Help from My Friends. And then Joe Cocker did it. And it didn't even sound like the same song. And even the Beatles admitted it was a better version of the song. My life, when we do something, when we set out to do something, is what are the core competencies of what it is? And then how can I bend it a little bit? When we did a steakhouse, somebody had done thousands and thousands and thousands of times before. The great conversation was, what makes us unique? So first we said, let's do a lot of cart service. So we had a beef Wellington cart, and we had a chocolate trolley, and we had a cocktail cart that went up. And we said, what if we have a magician who roams the table? This is true. At Swift and Sons, you can go on and you look at the menu. It says magic show at the table, 10 minutes, $40. We have a magician who, the first magician we had performed for every U.S. president, had been on the Tonight Show 10 times, and he would go table to table and he would do magic. And those were the things that made us unique. But I don't think without that Wendy's experience, I would have thought in that exact same way. I want to tell you 4 stories. One is about turning criticism into excellence. One is about staying humble no matter what someone has given you as an accolade. One is about writing scripts, and one is about the power of information. The most difficult customer I've ever had in the history of my company was a gentleman named Herb here in Chicago. Every time that Herb would walk into the restaurant and have a dining experience, he would give me an email that was as long as a Pete Wells review in the New York Times. And I went back and looked at some of them recently, and they were even like I thought that there were a lot of scuff marks on the host's shoes. He looked at everything. And at first, I was like, anxious to make things right. But after a year of getting them, I hated Herb. So one night, I gathered my entire team and I say, tonight, we're going to beat Herb. And I had a board out and almost probably looked like, like a Nick Saban football coach kind of, plays. You're going to go here and I'm going to go here. And I was like, there is nothing we're going to miss with this guy tonight. And the one thing that I knew I could not control was the valet. So I stood at the valet, and when Herb pulled up, I got his ticket from him. And I'm like, thank you, I'll take your keys. And he walked in the door. And here's the amazing thing about restaurants. No one in a restaurant is more important than any other person, because if one person drops the ball inside of a restaurant, it's all ruined. That's why there should be so much mutual respect inside of a restaurant. So when he walked up to the front, the woman who had put his reservation in 2 days before had put it in correct and at the correct time. We had also guessed exactly that the person who sat before him had only sat for an hour and 45 minutes, so his table was clean and reset. The polisher had polished every single plate and every single piece of silver and every glassware perfectly. There were no smudge marks. The person who printed the menu the day before had no misspellings on it. There were no smudge marks. We gave them the menus. The server came over. They were compelling. They were charming. They knew their stuff. They could answer any questions. And then the food came out. Every single component of every single prep person had prepped it correctly. Hot food hot, cold food cold. When he went to the bathroom, it was clean and it was stocked. Dessert comes out. It's delicious. The check comes out. His credit card goes through. And on the way out, no less than 6 people said to him, "Good night, sir. It was so nice to have you tonight." And I was standing at the host stand, and he put his hands on my shoulders and he goes, "Kevin, that was a goddamn dining experience." He walks out the door. I high five the general manager. I go back and I hug the chef. I go, see, if we put our mind to stuff, we can do anything. Go back into the dining room like a conquering hero. I'm walking throughout the dining room. And then I look 5 minutes later, he's walking back to me and he goes, "Kevin, where the F is the valet?" Everything we all do has a beginning and an ending to it. Hospitality is not like a football game. You can get up 46-0 in football and you can run out the clock. Hospitality is like a tennis match. You don't win the 6th game in the last set, and you got to know where your beginning is and you got to know where your ending is. I've had the great pleasure of having a restaurant right next door to Alinea for many, many years. Um, uh, Alinea is one of the greatest restaurants in the history of restaurants. At one point, it was number 4 on the world's best 50 list. Boca's in its 21st year. Alinea is in its 18th year. About 3 years into Alinea being open, it was named Gourmet's #1 restaurant in America. A couple weeks after that, a man walks in, 10-gallon cowboy hat with his wife. They go and they sit down. The server walks up and he goes, "Folks, we have a 12-course menu and we have a 24-course menu, which is called the tour." And the guy goes, "Son, let me cut you off. Best restaurant in America ought to be able to cook me the best goddamn steak in America." So the server wisely said, "Well, sir, thank you for that input. I'm going to go talk to Chef Achatz." And he goes back and he goes, "Grant, this guy says it for the best restaurant in America. We'll be able to cook the best steak in America." And Grant kind of folds his arms and very cockily says, "The man has a point. Go jump in your car, go around the corner of Sur La Top, give me a copper presentation pan." Gets a copper presentation pan. They were serving some rare Kobe that night. Cut off a piece, seared it, put it in the middle of the copper presentation pan, garnished it with bouquet garni, put it on a stand in the center of the table. Man and his wife eat it. He goes, "Son, come here. That was the best damn steak I ever had in my entire life. Now give me that tour thing you talked about." Then they ate all 24 courses. I love that story so much because Grant could have easily said, "We're a steakhouse. We do molecular gastronomy. This is what we do." Um, Living in a house of yes in the restaurant business, this is this other component of what sets you apart in this world. There's so many, it's like 5 different kinds of restaurants. There are bad restaurants, there are below average restaurants, there's average restaurants, there's good restaurants, great restaurants, and there's iconic restaurants. Make that jump from great to iconic, you have to do all of these things. You have to be able to listen to criticism. You have to be a house of yes, and you can never take yourself too seriously. And a third part of that is you have to pre-write scripts to whatever might happen. I have a very good friend who's an actor, who's also one of the best looking guys in history. His name's Michael Ealy, and Michael was in a play called Joe Fearless. Do you know Michael Ealy? I saw your face. The blue eyes are startling. I can't even look him in the eye. No, and Michael was in a play called Joe Fearless, and he was telling me about it one night. And it was on off Broadway, but the stage was it was mostly a basketball court, and then part of the stage was a man's apartment, supposedly watching the game. And so when the theater goers walked into the theater, they were watching choreographed dunks and drills and stuff like that before the play even started. And Michael noticed that during the warm-ups, Philip Seymour Hoffman, maybe my favorite actor of all time, sat in the front row of the play. And so at the end of the play, and in the play, the man supposedly bet like $1 million in the basketball game, and the mob's going to kill him if they don't win. So Michael gets the ball from about 12 feet out. He shoots it. He makes the shot. Everybody celebrates. The man in the apartment goes crazy. Curtains close, play out. Michael goes back. He changes clothes. He goes out the side door. Philip Seymour Hoffman's leaned up against a pole like this as Michael comes out, and he goes, "What happens if you miss it?" And Michael goes, "It's a different ending." And he goes, "What's the other ending?" And Michael goes, "You got to come back on a night when I miss." By the way, the play ran 100 times. Michael made the shot 70 times. He said he only felt pressure on the last show because they wanted to end on a positive note, and he made it the last night. But the point is, we all in the hospitality business write different scripts for every situation. You know, the person at this table might have the greatest meal they've ever had in their entire life. The woman might lean over to grab something and catch her hair on fire on the candle. I know what I'm going to do in both cases. So we're really script writers. And having this intuitive sense of what you're going to do in every situation is super important. I talked about Will before. Before I even knew him, I had dinner at 11 Madison Park one night, and it was the first time I'd been nominated for a Beard Award, and I really felt like this country bumpkin going to the city. We got nominated, but I didn't get invited to any parties. I didn't know very many people in New York. I made a reservation on Open Table at 11 Madison Park because I thought that'd be a great place to go. And we were just like, okay, we're gonna lose gracefully tomorrow. Let's go have a nice meal. So I walk in the door, and I literally got one foot stepped inside the door, and the maitre d' goes, "Mr. Boehm, how are you? It's nice to see you. Oh my God! And you brought Courtney with you, and you're with Rob and his wife Kathleen. Fantastic! Oh my God, so great! Come in right this way." They brought us to the table. Danny Meyer, who owned the restaurant at the time, had a handwritten letter in the center of the table congratulating us. Second course was in the kitchen. Every single person came up and congratulated us on our James Beard nomination. Went back out of the table. Best hospitality experience of my entire life. The end of the meal, maitre d' comes back up and says, "How was your meal tonight? We'd like to invite you to the party after the beard." We're like, "Wow, that's so kind. Thank you. It was amazing." And I said, "I have one question for you." I go, "Everybody always mispronounces my name." I was like, "You actually pronounced it correctly?" How'd you know?" And she goes, "Well, I was a little stumped on it, so I called Boca 30 minutes before you came to make sure that I got it right." And I was like, "God damn it, that's good." And I went back and I was like, "You know what? We need to be like little CIA agents with people that are coming in." Um, and that's one of the great things about social media is having a connection with guests before they even walk in the door. Um, I like technology to a point. I like to do a lot of things that are analog and use technology to make experiences more emotional. I said on the board of Open Table is only as good as you feed it. It's great technology for seating people, but what I did when I ran a floor every night, I was like, I need at least one piece of information of every table that sits there. And so Uh, being good CIA agents, that's another part. Um, I'm going to end with a story that I think says everything about what you need to know about hospitality. Um, on March of 2020, the day before we shut down restaurants, um, my mom died. Um, I was bedside with my mom in Springfield, Illinois, and because of COVID, we couldn't throw a funeral for her. So they shut down restaurants on Monday. She died on a Saturday. On that Sunday, I'd opened up a restaurant in Springfield, Illinois years before. I didn't own it anymore, but all the paintings on the wall were painted by my mom. I didn't have a lot of money. And so my favorite artist was George Rodriguez in New Orleans. And he painted these blue dogs. And so I showed my mom one of the blue dogs. I was like, "Can you paint this?" She painted it, and it was perfect. And I was like, "Mom, I need 17." So she painted 17 different blue dogs for me, and they still exist on the walls in Springfield. So we dined there that night. I was like, "We can't have a funeral, so let's get 16 people together that loved her. And at least we'll be surrounded by her paintings." We went there, and at the end of the meal, the current owner came up and he said, "Hey, Kevin, I'm really sorry about your mom. Could you tell me the story about the blue dogs again?" And then he asked me, "Which one of them is your favorite?" And I was like, "It was the first one I ever had to paint. It was the blue dog in the field of poppies." And he walked away from the table. He grabbed it off the wall and he handed it to me. He said, "You should go home with your family tonight." It was a moment in my life after giving hospitality people for 30 years where I needed hospitality the most, and it was a showstopper. We cried, but mostly out of happiness. Um, so I think the most important part about the future of service is where I started, which was kindness. The first thing that I knew that I was good at. The world needs kindness. And the best thing we can do when things in the world are going crazy is create a revolution of kindness in your own world. It's contagious. When you go in and somebody, the person before you bought your coffee or whatever that happens, what does it do? It makes you a little bit better person every single day. So that's what we try to do inside of our restaurants, but it's what we all should do and try in life. And that's my hope for the world. And I truly believe that restaurants can make the world a better place. There's a reason why when you go in the DMV, the energy feels terrible. And why all the people that work there seem like they're super grumpy because nobody wants to be at the DMV and they soak up all your energy and they give it back. The opposite is true as well. So um, I'm honored to be here today. I got to speak at Kendall Commencement about 8 years ago, which was a true joy and a true honor. And my favorite people in the world are hospitality people. I heard an interview with Jerry Seinfeld recently, and he goes, "Really? Besides my kids, the only people that I really like are other comedians." With some rare exceptions, and there are some wonderful people in my life that aren't in the hospitality business. I really only like people in the hospitality world. They're the best. So, cheers and thank you, and I'll take you through that.
We're gonna do some questions. All right, so stay right there. Go right there.
I'll answer anything.
You can even ask him about the cougar situation.
It was a bobcat, but yeah.
Oh, it's the bobcat. That's right. I was testing you, Jason.
By the way, when after the bobcat attacked me, I had locked it into a room and I called the police. At that point, I didn't know what it was because it had jumped on my back, and the cop showed up, and I go, "It's in there somewhere," and they opened the door and it was a bobcat, and the animal control got it and everything. And he goes, "Son, how long have you lived here?" And I was like, "About 8 weeks." And he's like, "Well, I sure hope it gets less weird for you." Yeah.
Okay. We'll go here first.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mike, you seem like you have a booming voice.
Kevin, thank you for being here. Your story, first of all, I'm Michael Krause. I'm a professor here at Kendall. I teach all the hotel tourism courses, and I was in the business for 35 years. You told a story about her, which I love, about her.
It was your father. No.
Everybody. He would never have done that. But you told the story and it's wonderful about how you and your staff went and did everything to go out of your way to one up him, basically. But there are times, as I know, when you just cannot see that person. At what point, and then how do you end that relationship on a positive?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I love Herb, and looking back, he was right on most of it, and he actually made me a lot better at my job. I still see him and I don't get emails from him anymore. I'm sure there's some other restaurateur who's getting crazy emails from him, but he really made me a better restaurateur. Now, there are people, when I first opened Boca, I was having my first child, and I was so scared that we were going to fail that it didn't matter what anybody did to me back then. I was a gentleman, and I would try, and that included, someone who pulled me by my lapels down to him, by my suit lapel down to his face and said, "Bring me my food now." And so there was this period of my life where I was just like, "Yes, sir." I don't do that anymore. And so there are people that I've fired before as a customer. And I think mutual respect is a really important thing. I also think that people get chances. I think that I see people in great moments. I see people in bad moments. People have bad moments all the time. I don't believe in um, I don't believe in full cancel culture for. It depends on what you're doing, of course. But somebody makes a mistake in my restaurant, and they've shown something in a bad light. I will have a conversation with them, but I'd like to give them an opportunity to correct it. And so I remember one customer that was constantly giving my staff a hard time, and I just said, "Dr. Blank," I was like, "You can't treat my staff this way. If you want to continue coming into my restaurants, you're going to have to change your behavior." Period. End of story. Which he apologized for, and then I asked him to apologize to the server, which he did. But then he came back about 2 weeks later and did something again, and then I fired him. I was like, "You're no longer welcome in my restaurant." About 2 years later, I saw him in one of my restaurants. He was being nice, and he looked at me kind of sheepishly and looked right back down at his plate, and I let him stay. I didn't kick him out.
Are there any other questions? All right, well, oh, yes.
I'll try.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sanya from Waldorf Astoria, and I see something really, because I'm looking at you, your body language and everything, and you are definitely present, right? So you know the names, you understand guest behaviors. But when it comes to our staff, what is what are the top three qualities that you are absolutely looking in when hiring?
Yeah. I always say in interviews, I'm really looking at two things. Do I like you, and do I think you're smart? I was lecturing at University of Illinois a couple of years ago, and at the hospitality school, and I did a little exercise, and I told everybody to line their chairs up, and I sat my chair in front of the first person. I sat down. I said, "What'd you have for breakfast today?" And they were like, "What?" And went to the second person. I go, "What'd you have for breakfast today?" And they're like, I went to the third person. I go, "What'd you have for breakfast this morning?" And she's like, "Well, I like to combine my cereals." And I go, "Really?" I go, "Really? Tell me more." And she's like, "Well, I put like some Fruit Loops in there for some sweetness, and I like some crunch, so I put the cornflakes in." And I'm like, "Fascinating. You're like a breakfast chef." We had this great conversation. I go, "Hey guys, she just got the job." It's not about breakfast. It's like, I think that people pre-rehearse answers to questions in interviews. What I want to know, can you mix it up with me or not? So I'm an unorthodox interviewer. And through just having a conversation with somebody about life, like I was like, what makes you happier than anything else in your life? And man, it stumps people sometimes. They don't know how to react to this. And usually those are the people that I don't want in my restaurants. I want people who have a high emotional IQ. I want people who can take care of people. And I want people, when they're having to write that script, where they got thrown off, can intuitively come up with something interesting. And so, we didn't get the first look of everybody when we opened Boca. Nobody knew who I was 21 years ago. Nobody knew who Rob Katz was, my partner 21 years ago. The people that wanted the best, the high draft picks were going to One Off Hospitality or were going to Lettuce or whatever, and I was getting like the best server from Springfield, Ohio, that didn't get hired of those other people. And so, but I found all these great people, all these incredible gems of people who might not have known how to hold a plate, but they were really smart people. I was like, we could teach you that. You know, I think we're good enough teachers that just give me a good person. You can't teach that. You're welcome.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shiva. I'm a sophomore student at Kendall College, majoring in hospitality management. I truly appreciate for inspired me, and I love your personality, the way you're talking. Could you share some, like, what's the successful people morning habits? What you do in the morning before starting the day?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, like, all right. I do like I believe in kind of New Year's resolutions, but I have a twist on it. I have it's a document on my iPad, and it's my currencies of success and my rules for myself for that year, and they change every year because we evolve as humans. Um, I like to when I wake up in the morning. Um, I write every morning when I wake up. I've been working on a book for a long time, so I just basically have finished it. It comes out next year. And so that's part of my process, and it's pretty meditative. Um, but I do something wellness wise every single morning. I learned a long time ago. Like I remember watching Oprah years and years ago, and it was her trainer said something to her. It's like this is in the Palm Pilot days. They're like, you do whatever that Palm Pilot tells you to do. Tell it to work. Make it say work out. And so I've gotten better at scheduling my meetings in blocks, but I have to have something wellness every single day to reset myself. And the most important thing I can tell everybody here, like no matter what you do, the word restaurant comes from the restoration of someone else or the restoration of people's souls. You can't properly restore anybody else if you're not restored yourself. And I ran really hard for a lot of years and was not restored. Um, and so I'm the healthiest of mind that I've ever been in my entire life. My mom was a manic depressive. I was actually a manic depressive, and the restaurant business kind of saved my life. Um, I don't deal with that much anymore, but mostly because I take every day with intention. And so between meditation and wellness and time to myself and finding some solitude, because I've been around people so much my whole life. My life, for all you Spinal Tap people, like my life's been turned up to 11 my whole life. And so I've learned how to turn the volume down in the past year. It's super helpful. So I think that recipe is different for everybody. Some people need 7 cups of coffee before they can get going and be nice to people. I need some time to myself alone in thought.